Hello everybody, this is Alex. Today we're going to look at how to make a groove box. A groove box is a kind of device where you have multiple buttons like here, and when you press them it's not just going to play a single sound but an entire melody. So is it an interaction? So we're talking about computational thinking pattern number 2, which is the interaction pattern. So if we look here, we have multiple agents in this pattern. We're going to have agents that are notes. They are the same as the interpreter symbols that we used before. We have a player agent, like this bug here following the notes. But we have also a new agent called the interactive note, which could be this red guy here that acts like a traffic pattern. Now, as an input, we can use the regular keyboard on a computer, or we can attach other kind of devices such as a groove box or a makey kind of device which can be plugged in through the USB port into your computer and would allow you to make any kind of input using fruit or who knows what, with the electrical wires attached to a little device called the makey. The basic idea here is that we create a world, that we're programming it, and that we make it interactive. So let's go into the simulation. So this is the project that has started. So what we're having here is a couple of notes. If you look here, we have essentially the basic note. We have a return symbol, we have a slap symbol, and the tone. So these are going to produce different kinds of sounds. And we're going to have our player. So if I select the player here, you're going to see its behavior. Let's make this a little smaller. So if I move this agent, you can see, the first symbol, if the player sees above it this symbol, it plays the taiko drum using this pitch 40. If it were to move to the next symbol, it moves and plays the taiko drum at a higher pitch, 70. And then finally we have this symbol here, which is the timpani, a different kind of music device, played at a different pitch. If you look very carefully here, we also have this message that is being sent to the symbol above. You don't actually need this if you don't want to, but what happens here, if the symbol is being sent, if I see the symbol, I send a message to it up, and so if you look at the symbol itself, you can see that the play method just rotates the symbol 360 degrees. So if we are to play, so you can see that we have a nice interesting rhythm going, two players playing two different melodies. But what we want is interaction. So far there's no interaction here, we have no keyboard control. So what I need is a new kind of symbol. That would be the interactive symbol. So I'm going to make a new agent, call it interactive note. And I'm going to make it look maybe like a traffic light. So I double click it, more tools, clear. I'm going to make a selection here, fill it in with red color, save. And we're going to have an interactive note that is red. I'm going to put one in here and one in here. And so far, if we look back to our player, the player right now, if I click the player, you can see all the rules are red. The player doesn't recognize the red symbol, and so it goes to the final rule and says, well, in that case, because I don't recognize it, I move to the right. So it would completely ignore it. So if you play it, So what we want instead is to interpret the symbol and only run if the symbol is not red. So first of all, we need to have the traffic light to have two states. It needs to be red to indicate that it's stopped, and green that it can go. So I'm going to click this little triangle here so that we're going to see multiple shapes if you have them. So far we only have a single shape. But so far it'll just copy the shape that we already have, which is not all that interesting. So I'm going to double click the traffic go one. I pick a green color and fill it. So let's save this. Now what I need to be able to do is, with my traffic light, so far it's red, and I need to adjust the rules of the player to be sure that only if the traffic light is green it can go. So if you go to the player, I need to add a new rule. So for instance, I could copy this rule and say, if I see above me an interactive node that is red, then I'm just gonna not do anything. I'm simply gonna stop. So if you run our simulation now, the traffic light is red, the rule would be active, and both of our players are stopped. That's good, but now we need to have the interaction. So we need to have a keyboard command that makes this interactive node switch from red to green. So what I could do, I can now go and select my interactive node, which has no behavior so far. And so what I want to do is to say switch to green if key pressed. So we can pick a key. I can say if key A is pressed, then I'm going to change myself to green. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to run this. I press A. So that's good. Our players no longer stop, but also this is not really what I had in mind here. Right? We only want to make it go once. So the traffic light needs to go back. So if I press A, it should change to green, but after some time it should change back to red. And I can do that by sending myself a message, but a delayed message. So I'm going to send myself a message. So I'm going to call the message, I'm going to give it a new name. I could say reset. I can make up any name I want to. I can just create a new name, but that wouldn't work yet because the method is undefined. So if we were to run this right now, I would get an error message. If I press A, interactive node does not respond to the reset method because we haven't created this method yet. So I'm adding a new method. And I say not unknown, but reset. And all I need to do is to say, well, if I changed from red to green, I need to change back to red. So, but the problem now is I already have these set to green. I need to make sure that we're starting at red. So I'm going to select red, put the red ones in. Red one here, red one there. I'm going to move these back to the beginning. I'm going to save the world. So now let's see how we're doing right now. So I'm going to run. They're red. I'm pressing A. And as you can see, the traffic lights is now switching back to red. So that's good. But now we come to the next challenge. I want to have a different key for the second player. So if I press maybe A, the player up here should change. The traffic lights. This traffic light should change. And if I press B, this traffic light should change. Now that's a problem because we can't just go to the traffic light and say, well, if I press B, well, we can try. Right, if I press B, then I change to green. But notice, these are of course the rules that apply to both of these interactive nodes. So if I run this, if I press A, both of them turn green. If I press B, both of them turn green. So this is not what we had in mind. We want to really say, if I press A, I only want to have this one activate, and if I press B, I only want to have this one. So that's now the part where we need to introduce attributes to differentiate them. So I can say, well, if I were to give each of these agents an attribute, and I can give it any name I want to. I can say the attribute could be called ID, and I could give it a number. So for instance, we could give this one the ID 1 and this one ID 2. And then if I press A, then only the one with ID 1 would go, and if I press B, only the one with ID 2. To that end, I'm just going to select the first one, and now I need to actually give it an ID. So let's see how we're going to do that. So I go to my actions, attributes and properties, and I can just say add new variable name ID, and the value that I'm going to set it to is 1. And now since this agent is selected and this action is selected, I can say test, and it will be executed. So now this node should have the value of ID 1. But how do we know? Did this actually work? Because there's no visible consequence here. So what I can do is I go to this menu here, and I say show agent attributes. I move this to the side here, and we see indeed our interactive node 1, this one, has an ID of 1. And if I click this one down here, it has none. So what I need to do is I make sure I select this one, change the value here to 2, and I need to run it again, test it, and then this one has 2. So now to be sure that this is working, I'm going to click the first one, its ID is 1. I'm clicking the second one, its ID is 2. This is exactly what we want to. And now we should not forget, because we changed the attributes of these agents, and these agents are in the world. So in other words, we changed the world. We need to save this, because otherwise we're going to lose these attributes. So I'm going to save the world. Now, however, this is still not going to work. This isn't really going to change our logic here, because if I press A and B, still the same thing would happen. So we need to have an additional condition. So I need to say, if I press A and my ID is not 21 but 1, or if I press this one and its ID is 2, then only then it would change. Well, one thing we could do here, and it doesn't really matter, it's gonna be the same thing, but for the sake of debugging, I'm gonna move this test condition to be the first one, so that I can actually find out if the logic does work. So if I select my first traffic light, I can see it says, yeah, for this one, ID is 1, this would be true. And if I then at one point pressed key A, it would change to green. But for the second one, we can see this test would be false, but this one would be true. ID is 2. And if I press B, this should change to green. So now let's run this. So if I press A, the first one is running. If I press B, the second one is running. Now I can press them at different times. So I can have interesting things going on. One thing I cannot have happening at the moment is I cannot press them exactly at the same time, because I cannot press 2 buttons at the same time. So if we really wanted, for some reason, for both of them to start at the same time, we could still do that. I could copy this rule, duplicate it, and say I'm ignoring, again, the ID. And I say if I press C, and then we're falling back to the old behavior. So let's see if this is happening. I press C. So I have now 3 options. A, place the first one. B, place the second one. C, place both of them. So this is how we're going to set this up. You can have any number of these symbols, and of course any length of nodes. In this particular case, if we look very carefully at our player, this player, when the player actually hits reset, then it's going to, when it finds the reset symbol, it's going to send itself the reset method. And when it receives the reset message, it's going to do this rule. It's going to move to the left as long as it's empty. But it has a second rule. It says if I see another player, I also move to the left. So this actually allows us to have multiple players going on at the same time. But they would just stack up, so this doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's possible. So with that, I'll end here, and the link is going to be provided to you, so you can start at the same point that I started and make your own groove box. Thank you very much.